Hello, guys, and what is up? Thank you all for tuning in today. I'm really excited to be releasing this new segment that I'd like to call Let's Talk. So, essentially, it's just going to be a series of segments about games that I love or maybe don't love so much, where I kind of get a little bit in depth with the game, show you some of the footage that I got while I was playing it, and give you my opinions on the game and kind of how I feel about it. So, again, thank you all for tuning in today. I really appreciate the continued love and support from everyone who watches the videos. And yeah, today we're going to be covering one of my favorite games of all time, um, and that is Final Fantasy VII. So, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and review the remake, and I'll give you some of my opinions and impressions about the original game as well. The original game was one of my favorites, and I've played through it so many times I can't even count. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it. Um, kind of get started with the development of the Final Fantasy series as a whole. Um, and just my experience with the franchise and how far along it's come. I mean, the first Final Fantasy game I actually played, it was Final Fantasy VII, and it was introduced to me when I was really really young. I didn't really get the concept of it at first, but as I grew older, I gained a huge appreciation for the game, and went on to actually play the rest of the series. And you see a lot of progression in the systems as time goes on, in terms of the combat, the graphics. Each Final Fantasy installment was something unique. For the most part, as they were coming out, be that good or bad, some of the games weren't as good as other games at 13. Um, but yeah, and I mean, the original Final Fantasy VII has always kind of stuck with me. So when they announced that they were going to be doing a Final Fantasy VII remake all those years ago, I was super stoked. And needless to say, I'm still just as stoked, even though it's being put out in parts. I think it's going to be worth it because they really did do a great job just breaking down the first segment of the game and turning it into a whole game of its own. I mean, that's something that's unique and really hard to do. And I think it was implemented very well in terms of how they told the story, as well as, how they implemented the gameplay mechanics and kind of just got a little bit more in depth with the characters that we know and love. And I think that's kind of an amazing thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, let's go ahead and kind of touch base there and start off with the story. What did I think about that? And also, I kind of want to know what you guys thought about it as well. So please feel free to go down in the comments section and tell me what you thought about the remake. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So the story, wow. This was a retelling of a story that I knew and loved, and it was explained very well and just kind of brought to light in this whole new fashion. But they added things into the game to kind of change it and add new aspects to the story to make things make just a little bit more sense, if you ask me, in terms of like what kinds of things were happening in the story and why. Aerith's connection to the life stream, things of that nature. It was really brought to light a little bit more. And I think one of the other things that I just love about this story so much being retold is that they really got into Cloud's personality, much so more than was done in the initial game. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a great like character progression for Cloud in the game, and you really do see him change in the original. But in this one, even by this short part in the story, mind you, this is like the first hour of the game broken down into like a 40-hour experience, and somehow they managed to take that original story and create all this character progression for Cloud, which is just phenomenal. I think, at least. But I mean, you really see him start off as the Cloud that we all know and love, that spiky haired edge lord with the big sword, right? Like in this scene here where Barrett tells him to get down here, Merc, and he does his little edgy front flip, onto the ground with his big old sword. Like, his I don't give a damn kind of attitude. And I love that about Cloud. But you really see that in this game, and you see him start to warm up to his companions and start to become more friends with him or with them. And in the original game, you didn't really see that happening until very late story. So it's really cool to kind of see how that they implemented that and made Cloud a more relatable and lovable character just from the get go, which makes me so stoked because when these next installments of the game come out, we're going to see even more character progression for Cloud, at least I hope, and I think that that's going to be just absolutely phenomenal. Um, but yeah, I mean, and other things in terms of the story that they did, I mean, the way that they made Sephiroth like this looming shadow throughout the story, like made a lot more sense than encounters in the original game, like because if you know the lore of Final Fantasy VII and what happened, supposedly Sephiroth is supposed to be dead, and Cloud basically threw him into a Mako reactor many years before the telling of Final Fantasy VII. And so it was kind of interesting how they played him off like he's more a figment of Cloud's imagination rather than an actual person. And, that could be him speaking to him through the live stream, what have you. I mean, it was stated in Advent Children that Sephiroth did become a part of the live stream, and as long as Cloud existed, so did he. So, I mean, it's really cool what they kind of went ahead and did with this, and I'm personally really excited to see where they go with Sephiroth. I mean, that the little boss fight that you get at the end there, where you get a square off with your boy Sephiroth, is awesome. I mean, that was great to throw in there as just like a foreshadowing. Here's what's to come. Um, and in terms of that, I mean, they also did a great job. Breaking down other characters that were less relatable in the original game. Like, you take Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, for example. They were don't get me wrong, when things happen in the story, sure, there was some kind of engagement to these characters, but they really built them up in the remake to give them a lot more personality and make you feel more attached. So when Jesse dies, it's just awful. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I was pretty bent up about it in the original game, but going through it in the remake, she's like a potential love interest for Cloud. She has a lot more dialogue, and she's just a friendly character. And then, I mean, you take, Biggs, for example, and Biggs is just so much more. So much more. They built on him, helping out with the orphanage and originally being an orphan and, things like that. So when you're under the impression that he's dead, I mean, it's just, wow. It was so heartbreaking after they built that character up this time. And I mean, I knew it was coming, but still. And even still, when you thought that Wedge was dead when the plate falls, it's still like, wow, that's very heartbreaking. And seeing him ripped out of the Shinra Tower as well, it was just very, very sad to me. And I think they did a really good job, like emotionally connecting you to a lot of the characters, and not just the main characters, but you know the side characters as well. I mean, they did a great job with that, and elaborating. I mean, you've even got a little bit more build on Tifa and Cloud's relationship and Aerith and Cloud's relationship. And, I'm not going to get into the Aerith versus Aerith things with you guys. I'm since I played the original game, it was Aerith, and that's what I'm going with. If you don't like it, that's fine. But yeah, anyways, I mean, they did a great job with that. You feel a lot more connected to both of them as to where, in the original game, yeah, sure, there was a lot of things that happened and there was bonding moments and things like that, but the way that it was portrayed in this game just made it seem like you were so much more connected to these characters, and I love that. And I really don't mind the little changes that they made to the story. in terms of like additions of different kinds of enemies that we've never seen and things like that. I mean, that's I would call that a pro rather than a con, because if you're gonna take, the first hour of gameplay and turn it into a whole game, you've really got to change some things up. And I think that they did a really great job with that, in all honesty. But yeah, I'm really excited to see what comes in the next installments. When they come out, hopefully I'm going to be putting up another video after I get a little bit of gameplay and I beat it and see what I think. Um, but yeah, I mean, let's go ahead and get into like the progression for the graphics. So if you're an old school Final Fantasy player, you know that it started out as like this 8-bit like just turn-based RPG game, and it didn't have a lot to it. Well, I mean, it did have a lot to it. Don't get me wrong. That's what makes Final Fantasy games so great, is that they just have these systems built into them that are so intricate that you can customize them to enjoy the game in a fashion that you like. And you still really saw that with the original 7, and you're still seeing that with this one. And you look at the progression of the games, and in 7 you had the introduction of your ATB gauge, and more real paced combat, but there was always the option to kind of turn that off in the menu. um, in this one, they really just kind of, I don't know, they just created something amazing in terms of the graphics and the gameplay. I mean, graphics wise, let's be honest, this is probably one of the best looking games on the market, especially if you're playing it on a PS4 Pro. It looks phenomenal, and that's a huge step up from the original Final Fantasy VII with your blocky characters and your triangle pointed hairs and things like that. Super buff arms, or forearms I should say. But yeah, I mean, they did a great job of implementing this. I didn't have a lot of problems that I had seen that people were talking about online when it came to like texture pops and things of that nature. But I think that's because I was playing it on the Pro. But yeah, I mean, honestly, it was a stunning game. It was beautiful. The cutscenes and gameplay, I mean, the transition was almost seamless, and that was something that Square kind of introduced with Kingdom Hearts 3 not long before introducing this. But I mean, as we saw, this game has way higher graphical quality than something like Kingdom Hearts 3. Um, and I just really think that they did a phenomenal job with it. And then in terms of the combat, I mean, don't get me wrong, I was one of those people who was really hoping for a turn based mode for this game. One where, I could just kind of select my actions, much like the original one, with just these updated, beautiful graphics. And unfortunately, Square decided not to bring that to the table, but that's okay with me because the game wound up being so stellar. Um, I mean, the combat system for it is something new and unique. I mean, you've got this mix between, well, I mean, if you're playing in regular, normal, easy, whatever mode, besides classic, you've got like this mix between almost a hack and slash style combat with added in time stops so that you can use special abilities, which is just great. And I mean, character switching, phenomenal. And the fact that you don't even have to switch to the character to use their moves and send out commands to them, that's great. That's something that I would have hoped for in a game where they decided to take out the original turn-based combat and make it something more. And in all truth and honesty, I mean, there wasn't a better way to implement this so that new people who are new to the franchise essentially would be able to jump in and enjoy it. Um, with the modern style of gameplay and things like that. I mean, they really did a great job with that. The combat is phenomenal. The materia system is great. I would have really hoped for maybe a little bit more customization on the materia system, but I'm not going to judge them too hard for that because all things considered, this is essentially the first hour of the story. And so I mean, when it comes down to that, there's so many material that we don't have access to yet in the story. And in all honesty, if we had access to a lot of them, I think that our party would be way too overpowered walking into the next game. But I mean, they did a lot of great things in terms of the summons. Holy moly. The summons are freaking amazing. I really enjoyed how they worked. I enjoyed earning them, going through the story, little missions with Shinra, and just acquiring each summon. It was really cool. And every time I got a new summon, I just felt excited, There was that nostalgic feeling of, this isn't just like some hack and slash remake of Final Fantasy VII. It's in addition to Final Fantasy VII, and it's a throwback. Like, you see a lot of the things that you love, like your summons and your different weapons and characters that you know and love, just not being forgotten or lost somewhere along in the development, and that's really fantastic. But yeah, I mean, when I got when I got Ifrit, I mean that was so cool, being able to see him in this new glory, and he was all beefed up, and it wasn't like, the other renditions that we've seen of him in newer games either, like when you're playing like some Final Fantasy Online or something like that, to get some modern graphics to see these summons. But it really felt like the original summon that I knew when I was young, and it just really threw me back. And then even seeing Shiva and Bahamut, and the Fat Chocobo was a hilarious but fun addition. And then your DLC summons that came with the game, that was also pretty cool too if you got your deluxe edition. But yeah, I mean, they did an overall great job with it. I think it was really cool how each of the individual summons worked and how you had to fight them and beat them in order to get the materia. I mean, that was pretty cool how it was implemented, and doing the missions. I wasn't a big fan of all of the missions. Some of them were a little bit confusing and didn't give you all the guidance you really needed, I would say, to be able to figure out how to do some of them. But all in all, I mean, I still think it was a really cool addition to the game, and it didn't break the combat or anything like that either because of how they implemented it. At least I think so. Bahamut's a little bit gangster, but besides that, it was really fun. And I mean, I felt the need to do all of the side quests and everything like that as I was going through the game, because it was just all around so fun. And I think that they did a really great job with that, and in terms of the actual gameplay itself. I mean, touching base on that, the new weapon system, wow, that was a great addition to the game, because having your original weapons throughout the game, yeah, it was cool, but you had to upgrade as you were going through the game. You couldn't really rock your Buster Sword the whole game. And having that implementation in this one where you can kind of rock your Buster Sword through the entire game as long as you do the upgrades for it is just really cool. And I think, in all honesty, the whole weapon tree that they had set up for getting different stats and skills and things like that to kind of further customize the playstyle to your own personal liking was just an awesome and great addition. And I really think that they did well with it. Adding extra materia slots to the weapons, albeit I would have liked to have seen them all implemented onto the swords, but I mean, it's give and take. I mean, with a game that's this graphically demanding, I understand that adding things in like that might be a little bit rough, but even still, I thought that they did a great job with the weapons. The boss fights, I mean, as we can see, this the legendary Scorpion boss fight that's going on this on the screen right now it's memorable because it's your first boss of Final Fantasy VII, and the way that they kind of brought this into play was really cool. They really brought this boss to life, and just, but I mean, they also made you feel that nostalgia while you were fighting him, and I think that's definitely something worth noting. And I mean, they did that with all of the bosses throughout the game, the Air Buster and things like that. It was all really cool and really nostalgic, and I loved seeing these iconic bosses and getting to fight them again. and just in this whole new fashion and light, because wow, I mean, it's super cool. And I mean, I really am just so excited to see a lot of the optional bosses from the original game, and I don't know if they're going to be optional in this remake or what they're going to do with it. But fighting the weapons was always something that was really really cool. Um, everybody loved fighting the ruby weapon and coming up with fun ways to beat him, and things of that nature. But like I just think it's going to be cool to see those implemented in the new one, and what they did with the current bosses in this game and their unique mechanics and way of messing you up in combat, in all honesty, was just really cool. And it really made you think. You couldn't really just hack and slash your way through these bosses. You had to be tactical, which makes me super super excited. I mean, that's the whole point of a Final Fantasy game, is that you're supposed to be smart and tactical. And I think that what they've done with this is just phenomenal. But yeah, I mean, kind of getting into some of the other mechanics, it was really cool to see, limit breaks back in action. It seems like they changed the names for some of them, but that's okay. I mean, some of them had kind of wonky names, and some of them might not have been as useful in this remake, so I kind of get that. But I really like having that back in play and being able to unleash your limit break as your final attack to take down the boss, which is, it's just, it gives you that sense of fulfillment. Like, wow, I just beat that guy and I finished him off with Cloud's awesome ability. And I'm really really excited to see Omni Slash come back into play. Not gonna lie, I've seen it done in multiple times in different variants, throughout different Final Fantasy games in which you can play as Cloud, like the Dissidia series and things like that. And you gotta love just what they did with it in those games, even though they were a little bit more cartoony. It really gives me some hope for how cool it's going to be in this one. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, the other thing I kind of wanted to touch base on, in terms of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, is how excited I am for them to expand the lore of Final Fantasy VII. You know, the team over there and Tetsuya Nomura have said that basically they are planning on expanding the entire Final Fantasy VII universe into this remake, which makes me really, really excited because, there's the potential to see Crisis Core, which, if you haven't played Crisis Core, it's the precursor to Final Fantasy VII, and it's, well, not necessarily the precursor, but it's the prequel, I should say, to Final Fantasy VII, and it gives you a lot of story about what happened to Cloud, that led him to be the way that he is in Final Fantasy VII, because you follow a different character named Zack, who is basically Cloud's mentor. And Zack is a very lovable and relatable character, and you just kind of enjoy every second of his story. And that's what made the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake so impactful when you saw Zack there. Even if they did mess up his iconic line, which that one did get me a little bit, made me a little bit upset, but still, I digress. I think that it's going to be awesome when they expand that, when we get to see Crisis Core, Advent Children, Dirge of Cerberus, maybe even Before Crisis, which a lot of people don't know about Before Crisis, but what it is it's just kind of a little game that follows the Turks. And it's prior to the events of Crisis Core in Final Fantasy VII, which is pretty cool. And then Dirge of Cerberus is a story about Vincent Valentine, and you see iconic characters throughout the game, and one of the main people that you interact with a lot is Yuffie, which is awesome because she was one of my favorite characters to play in Final Fantasy VII. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how they kind of expand the lore. I'm hoping that we get to see all of this just implemented maybe as DLC or even just further expansions to the game. I think that would be something that would be completely amazing. And yeah, I'm all for it. I know a lot of people were upset that it was coming out in installments, and they were saying things like, "Oh, well, I'm not going to pay the money for that." Well, you know what, I am, because this game is so phenomenal that the rest of the expansions to it are also going to be amazing, and I'm really excited to see what they do with it in the future. But yeah, if they jump in and make DLC segments or even just expansions following, Crisis Core, Dirge of Cerberus, Advent Children, it's really going to be amazing. And I definitely, no, I hate to poke the bear on the spending more money train, because I know how much everybody hates the concept of spending more money on games when they don't have to, but I would like to see some DLC items added in, maybe some new weapons for the characters, maybe some costumes, a little throwback to Kingdom Hearts 1 Cloud. That would be really neat. It's one of my favorite costumes for him. And not to mention, I mean, we've seen that costume for him in multiple Dissidia games that we've played. If you guys have played the Dissidia games, if not, I would definitely recommend playing Dissidia and Dissidia Duodecim. They're both awesome. I'm not a big fan of NT. Even though it had great graphics, the combat just wasn't that great. But yeah, Duodecim and original Dissidia were awesome, and they have really cool gameplay. If you don't know about it, a little brief synopsis. It's really just a mashup of all your favorite Final Fantasy characters in a more fighting-esque kind of game, with a little added flair, because you can fly around and use all their special abilities and whatnot, which is really cool. But yeah, I mean, in this case, I'm just really excited, and I just wanted to do a little review of this because it is one of my favorite games of all time, and I figured I'd share this with you guys and kind of give you my opinions and see what you thought. Like I said, definitely go ahead and feel free to leave some comments down there with your opinions on it, maybe things you'd like to see in future installments, DLC, things like that, or just feel free to tell me that you disagree with my opinion and you think I'm stupid. That is completely up to you guys, but I would love to see the feedback, and I would love to see the next installment to Final Fantasy VII Remake. So yeah, definitely look out for new content. I am going to be putting out more videos with this Let's Talk series. I'm thinking about doing one for the new God of War PS4, and because that game was so legendary. So definitely feel free to tune in and check that one out as well. I'll try and get an update to you guys up on the Facebook page when I decide to go ahead and release that. But anyways, I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for all your continued support and love throughout the videos that I've been making. And yeah, I mean, definitely make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos, and make sure to check out the Facebook channel as well as the Twitch, where I go ahead and live stream. I usually am up on there with our buddy Joey that we love so much. So yeah, make sure to check that stuff out, like and subscribe. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and peace out.
Like the ancients, we've harnessed the power of Mako. Are they out there watching us, waiting for us to join them in some blessed corner of the world? A green and verdant land where boundless Mako energy will provide for our every need. Shinra is working for you to fulfill the hope of the ancients and lead us to that promised land. We shall not rest until our dream is realized.
That it?
Ripper Tube.